It's Zach Eady with Purdue men's basketball, and you're watching Boilers in the Stands.
Welcome back to Boilers in the Stands. I am your host, Joe Jackson. Alongside me, as always, is my co-host, Kraig Bowers. Purdue, 83-64 win over Toledo. Their kind of break game that you want to call it before getting into Big Ten play. We'll talk maybe briefly about just kind of the Big Ten schedule upcoming towards the end of the show, but definitely plenty to talk about from this game. Even with it being a bye game, Brain Smith goes for a career-high 34 points. TKR adds 23, Lawyer adds 17, and they get 9 points elsewhere from Purdue. Plenty to talk about within this game. Kraig is there in Mackey Arena. I am dealing with a little bit of a cold that I think also like 50% of America, it seems like, is dealing with. So decided to stay back for this one. I'll throw it to you, Kraig. What were kind of your initial thoughts from the game, the Mackey environment, all of that good stuff?
Yeah, I kind of want to start out just talking about the break game environment because I was thinking today, I was walking around the concourse, like, I like to go do that every time before the game starts. I venture out with everybody else. And, I saw a lot of people that I don't see here necessarily for all the other games in terms of friends or people that I went to college with, stuff like that. Heard a lot of people talking about bringing their kids to the game for the first time. These break games, I know people talk about, well, it's not quite the same environment without the student body here and everything, but I do think they're a really good and important thing that kind of allows a lot of people who may not get to go to a lot of the other games that don't have season tickets just because there is more ticket availability. A lot of little kids get to go to their first game in Mackey ever. So it's neat. And it was a good crowd today. It was full. It was more full than a game right before finals week or the beginning of finals week before we went into break. So 21 days off seems like it's been forever. Maybe that had something to do with the crowd today as well. Just people being anxious to get to see their Boilers again. But it was good. In terms of the game itself, I think there's several things we can get in and talk about that I think are really more big picture type stuff related to Purdue. Kind of as a trend as what we've been seeing more maybe than like specific matchup things that Toledo did to Purdue or anything like that. But at the same time, if you've watched any games today, you saw the Christmas break sluggishness, right? Where I watched multiple Big Ten games today. Everybody came out looking like they'd had time off. Most teams get one real practice of real run when they get back together and then play this weekend. And you could see it that maybe some rust needed to be knocked off a little bit today as well for Purdue. Things started out a little bit slow. Pretty common theme across the conference in general today. And then they finally found their footing and they took off. And I think there was a specific switch that led to them finding their footing and allowed them to take off. But I know we're going to dive into that a little bit more later.
My bad. There was looking at some stats and was not quite on it in terms of the backside media production. But yeah, no, I'm with you. It is a break game. From the game itself, there's not too many things I have takeaways. Hey, they look sluggish for a bit. Hey, they're a better team. They turn it on. Brain Smith's really good. All that good stuff. Not too much more from that. But yeah, I think there's some bigger picture things we can kind of discuss. Is Purdue has now 18 games left in the regular season. They are currently 9-4, so a little under 50% of the way through the season, which just actually that kind of feels wild. Like they're almost 50% of the way through the season. I feel like the season just started like 2 weeks ago. But we are 2 months into the season. We'll dive into all that. Like I said, if you are watching, please like and subscribe. Turn on bell notifications. You'll get notified when we put out previews for every game, post-game notes or shows for every single game. We did fix the like the donation button on YouTube. So if you do want a comment read for sure, that is, we believe, now fixed in a way to be able to support us if you feel like you want to do that. We do appreciate any and all support. But truly just, hitting like, subscribing does help us out a ton. So let's get into it. Kind of more of the if there's anything specific from the game, we'll talk about that. I know there's more big picture things that we kind of want to hit on, but from this game specifically, I'll throw up the stats here. I think the big thing is going to be that, Purdue takes a lot of threes. That was more so in the first half. In the second half, shoots 35% from three. Braden Smith with 34 points, 12 assists. TKR with 23.6 rebounds. Fletcher Lawyer with 17 points, 3 rebounds, 3 assists. From this game specifically, is there anything you kind of want to hit on it or kind of shout out within these 40 minutes of play?
I mean, yeah, I think there still is. And, it was really interesting to me because in the preview show we did leading into this game, you and I talked about TKR should be able to eat down low. And Braden Smith was going to give them all kinds of trouble in pick and roll because of what we'd seen Toledo do defensively against pick and roll was not good coming into this game. And Purdue opens up this game. 6 out of their 8 first shot attempts were threes. 9 of their first 13 were threes. A lot of those were kicking out to the wings. And I was just like, what? Like, did they not see the same scout? Like, what are they doing? And then finally they started settling down and going into TKR, and he started going to work. And, Purdue started to generate some points because they certainly weren't hitting a lot of those early threes with Miles and Cam missing several and Fletcher missing his first one there until he hits that tough mid-range jumper that kind of gets him rolling in this game as well. And obviously Braden was elite, right? I just, no questions asked, sets a career high. What'd you say? He finished with 34 points?
Yep.
So double-double. With 34 points, 10 plus assists. I'm sure we're going to see some stat from Purdue that says that's the first time that's happened in Purdue history. And however long, they're really good. Foreman's really good about kind of diving into those stats and seeing where it tracks from a historical standpoint. So, yeah, I think obviously Braden was really good. Fletcher got on track and got really hot over certain stretches of this game. And then TKR finally went to work. He should own this team. I think in the preview show, I said something like it's a game he should be able to get 30 plus if he really wants to. Doesn't quite hit there. But I think some of that was just shot selection early on, or he very easily could have had 30. And then he, picks up those 2 fouls and goes to the bench for a really long stretch. But, we kind of know that the big three are going to contribute in these type of games. We've seen some games where teams have been able to slow TKR down or have been able to slow down Lawyer or frustrate Smith with a high hedge or whatever. And if you remove one of those three, the real big picture question is then what does Purdue do? And like you said, in this specific game, they didn't get a lot of help from a scoring standpoint from a lot of other areas in the bench, even though I think there are 3 guys who did really, really good things for this team today in this game that weren't necessarily about generating a ton of points. But I still think, some of it is just common sense too, in regards to that. There was some point today, right, where CJ hits that first bucket, which is the only point scored for Purdue other than, I think at the time it was other than Braden Smith and TKR, because I don't think Fletcher had scored yet. But I went and looked at the stat sheet right away, then there were only 6 shot attempts at that time from the entire rest of the team. So, I mean, some of it is them not hitting shots. Some of it, too, is in a game like this where Braden and TK are going to eat, that Purdue just has a really, really high focal point on that 2-man game, and there's not a lot of other guys getting shot attempts up. Now, later in the game, you saw that ball start to get spread around maybe a little bit more. And obviously Fletcher got going and started hitting, but I think sometimes it gets blown out of proportion to a degree. I think it's really, really important we get everybody else going, and it's a major, major concern. But I think sometimes it gets blown out of proportion a little bit just because of like what Purdue's trying to do in their 2-man game.
Yeah, so we can talk about it, right? I think the elephant in the room sort of is Colvin Heidi. They are 0 for 8 again. They have not shot the ball well at all over the past really month, right? I think Colvin's 1 for his last like 14 or something like that from 3. 5, 11, 1 for his last 13. I know Heidi hasn't been great. Lawyer gets back on track shooting the ball, but those two have to simply knock down shots. Like, it's not like they were getting bad looks. They got good looks, and I do think, there's some comments of, hey, why aren't more stuff run for them? And I think that is fair to a degree, of just trying to get them looks. I think what makes it a little bit tougher to run stuff for them specifically those two, right, compared to like a guy like even CJ Cox, is that feels very much like you either have to get a catch and shoot 3, or you kind of have to create a wide open lane for them to drive. Where somebody even like Fletch, right, like, it isn't pretty. It isn't always even the most efficient. There are games you don't really want to run it for him to get downhill, but he's shown that, hey, he can do that, right? He can get downhill. He can get to that wonky little floater thing that he does that just goes in, right? Miles and Cam don't have that, I don't think, right now. And you could talk about, well, they need the game reps. Well, they should have done it more in summer, all that stuff. But like, I don't trust them dribbling right now. I don't think Painter really wants to see them dribbling when you have Braden Smith. And so it's this tough balance of like, you do need to get them going because they're going to be important for this very long Big Ten schedule. But at the same time, like, what exactly do you run, right? Honestly, a lot of their looks come from Braden Smith pick and roll and kicking out. And I don't know what the right balance is. I don't know what the right answer is. It's almost a little funny because I think like the general consensus for forever is, right, that Purdue is too stagnant offensively. Not stagnant, but like they're too robotic, right? They run their sets, and if the set doesn't happen, then what happens? And now it feels like it's like started to swing the other way, where people are like, Purdue doesn't get looks for their guys enough. They just let Braden Smith and TKR do their thing too much. I'm not saying either one's right or wrong. I'm just saying it's kind of funny to see the perspective on that of like how it has flipped, I think, pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, it is. And I've been one of the people who have said a couple of times this year, like, why aren't we running more stuff? Like, why aren't we running that zoom action? And I guess,
and I'm not even saying that. I'm not saying you're even wrong in that analysis. I'm just saying it's just like funny to see that it's flipped.
And in a game like today, I don't think you worry about it as much because those two were gonna eat. Toledo does not handle pick and rolls well. They do not handle big men well, and they were going to get theirs. And especially after the lineup kind of switches a little bit, and then Toledo has to guard 2 bigs. It made it even more difficult for him, even though the 1 big for us isn't scoring. It just still makes them guard 2 big men. But at the same time, there's a little piece of me that's if we just wait to do those things when other teams shut down one of the big 3, are they going to be ready to do it on the spot? And I guess for me, I've been really kind of sounding the horn for CJ Cox, and he takes 1 shot attempt today. He hits it. He creates that shot himself off of the bounce. And he has that capability to do that. But we saw in the last game, them run some of that zoom action they run for Carson Edwards to get him open, and he generates points off of that in that game. And there's a little piece of me that just wants to see some of those actions again, just so that when we hit those games where they are, kind of turning off the faucet on the big 3, that we know the capability is there for some of those other guys to go get it. And I think there's a really interesting discussion too to be had of just with the gravity that Zach drew in the middle. Like, you could surround him with a bunch of guys that were just stand still, catch and shoot 3-point shooters, right? Because they were going to help on Zach. Everybody did it other than UConn. Maybe, no, Izzo didn't try that last year. He tried it the year before. I can't think of another team that didn't double Zach, right? So you're generating all of these open looks where guys can catch it basically as, standing still 3-point jump shooters. And that is perfect for Cam and Miles, right? Now, TKR will draw some doubles, but he doesn't have the same type of gravity. And there are going to be plenty of teams that will try to defend TKR 1-on-1 and that will have a decent amount of success doing it with certain guys. And it's almost it's almost like it's made the dynamic that much tougher for Miles and Cam now. And it, to a degree, you need those guys to have more ability to generate on their own off the bounce a little bit or off of cuts. And, we'd seen Miles try it a little bit more this year, and he'd had some success. Today wasn't one of those days. Basically, every time he went towards the rim, whether it was on a cut or with the ball in his hand, it didn't end well. And I'm not saying that Miles and Cam aren't both still great players. It's just you start to look at the fit in the system, and it's going to be real interesting. You basically saw today, right, where other people on the team got more minutes than those two, even though those two were the starters, because the fit today was just better for other guys.
So yeah, a lot there.
Sorry, I rambled. I rambled.
No, and I think it's a lot of good points because that's where this discussion is. We know Braden Smith's elite. We know TKR is elite. We know Fletcher Lawyer is an elite third option or a very good third option, wherever you kind of fall with the Fletcher Lawyer discussion. It is what happens when, teams can speed Braden Smith up and get the ball out of his hands. What happens when Fletcher Lawyer can't quite knock down as many threes as we want, or TKR is getting really sped up? Then what happens? Like, Purdue has not shown that they have an answer. CJ Cox off the bench. He's a guy that can go create a bucket kind of whenever he wants, right? Colvin and Heidi, I think you're spot on though. If Colvin and Heidi not benefited because they are very good players on their own, right? I don't think they are only good because they played with Zach Edey last year, but I think it is also fair to say that most players are going to look better around Edey, and now they're maybe not adapting as quickly as somebody like Braden Smith and TKR, who kind of fit naturally together. Of hey, let's run this 2-man game, and Fletch fits really well as that third guy. Of hey, I'll be the benefactor when defenses put 2 on the ball or defenses kind of really hug TKR on the roll. I'll be the benefactor of that. Now it's what happens beyond that. Colvin and Heidi, some of it is simply right, if they just knock down a couple threes, we aren't probably having this discussion that much. Or if it is, it's a very quick one of hey, it's great that they knock down threes. Would love to see them drive a little bit. But they haven't, and they've gotten good looks and they missed. And I do expect that to switch back around at some point. I don't think they're going to, Colvin's shooting 34% from 3 on the year. I don't think that's going to hold. I think he's going to shoot better than that. Heidi's down to 40%. Maybe 40% is probably closer to where his true average stands. But right, he's, what is he? I just had up. He's 2. Oh man, going back to NC State, he's 2 for his last 14. And what did I say Colvin was? 1 for his last 13. So they're 3 of their last 27 from 3. Getting even to 7, 8, 9 threes made changes the discussion a bit. They do have to make them though. Sometimes it is as simple as that. You do got to knock down shots. But yeah, and I do agree with the CJ stuff of I like that he got a little bit more run today. Even a little bit with, honestly, I liked how, I'll bring up the rotation here. There's that change, and this is only for Kraig that'll know. There's the change in the StreamYard on the right. It is throwing me off of where I need to click automatically. But here is the rotation for everybody on YouTube. So color box means that player played that minute. You can see what position corresponds to at the bottom. Purdue margin means that lineup was plus or minus whatever. If you want to argue Lawyer's the 3 and Harris is the 2, that's fine with me, whatever. What I like that he did is that first half, you see Jakari get a little bit of that run from the 13 to 11 minute mark where he's with Braden and Fletch. And in the second half, you see CJ gets it. And I like that, especially in a game like this, where you still have to play the game, you still have to win, but you're expecting to win. I like getting both of them experience as that 3-man or that third guy pairing with Smith and Lawyer, just kind of getting them some of those minutes. Cause I think they both played really well. And I think they both did very good things today. And I feel like for me, coming into the year, I was like, man, I don't know how Painter's going to keep both Harris and Cox off the floor. And then I think as the season went a little bit, I was like, okay, Colvin and Heidi, I get this. And now I'm kind of back to hey, I don't know how Painter's going to keep Harris and Cox off the floor. I think, especially CJ with his shot making ability, Jakari, I think, does everything else really, really well. They are both going to be very valuable. And you just, they're going to be needed, especially if Colvin and Heidi kind of stay in this slump, not lump.
Yeah, and I think again, it's not just as simple as do you play one of those guys instead of Miles, right? Or do you play one of those guys instead of Cam? Because once you put them in, right, you're essentially closer to last year's lineup with Lance in there, where you're going Braden Smith at 6 foot or maybe a little bit under, Fletcher at 6'4", and then Lance was 6'1", right? Jakari's a little bit bigger than Lance, but not a bunch, right? CJ's relatively close, like 6'2" probably to what Lance is. But you had Zach Edey on the backside of that. So you were funneling everything defensively towards a big man. You know, with Cam at the 4 and TKR at the 5, TKR is not the greatest rim defender as a 5 at 6'9", right? And then you've got Cam at the 4. So you're not getting necessarily a ton of help there in post defense or paint defense either. So that lineup in any formation, right, where you're running Fletcher, Braden, and either Jakari or CJ, or you're running Jakari and CJ with Braden, which happened to us a few stretches today as well. I think you have to have 2 bigs in there, right? You to me, just defensively, you have to have Caleb and TKR, or we even saw it today with Caleb and Burgess in there at a couple of stretches. And then you've got a little bit more rim protection. And I think the monkey in the room, too, we can talk about today, right, is Caleb first changed this game. All right. And we're going to do game balls at the end. I'm going to go ahead and just, you're going to pick Braden because Braden was an absolute beast. And I'm going to pick Caleb first because he absolutely changed this game. But like defensively, we were atrocious in the small ball lineup defending the paint. Absolutely atrocious. And as soon as first came in, I thought no matter who he was paired with, but especially TKR, he completely changed that in this game. And plus minus isn't a perfect indicator, but it tells a big story in this game, if you want to believe it, right? TKR in first pairing, I kept track of this the whole game today, Joe. TKR in first finished plus 20 in their pairing, and the Cam TKR pairing finishes -4 today. Every single pairing in this game that included first was net positive today. He finishes with 2 points and 5 rebounds, right? And like, if you don't understand first importance today, then you are a box score watcher. That's all I can say about that. He was dramatic in this game in terms of the way that he changed it. And I think that then allows you to play with more of those perimeter lineups in terms of how you pair up Braden, Jakari, CJ, and Lawyer. And then that gets us back to having 2 really good ball handlers on the floor at the same time, or 3 if it's Jakari and CJ, 2 if it's, you know, a pairing with Fletcher. And I just have really liked those looks in terms of the way the lineup and roster construction works when those have been in lately.
Yeah, and I'm with you. Like, I think because right, this correlates to TKR at the 5 and the small ball. I think where I'm at is I still think Cam at the 4 and TKR at the 5 can succeed and be good and be successful. I don't want Purdue to have to rely on it. I want it to be something that Purdue can go to and be like, oh, let's throw this look at them. And then there's going to be games where it works and it pops and they play 20 minutes with TKR at the 5. But for most of the season, it's been like, hey, especially after the first experiment with kind of Berg, and then obviously Jacobson goes down. Those didn't, obviously Jacobson getting hurt doesn't work, but Berg not being as good as many hoped. You get to this point where you kind of have to go to it. Right? Like, okay, we just kind of have to go to it. This is how, in theory, we get our 5 best players on the floor. First is not a perfect player by any means, but he does a lot of things that Purdue needs. And I think my biggest point with this, and this is coming from somebody, I mean, remember this offseason, from day one, I was very big on like Heidi at the 4, TKR at the 5. The thought with it is the offense is going to be so good that it's going to make up for anything defensively. What I think maybe I didn't account for, and some other people as well, is like Braden Smith's insanely good at basketball. And it's obviously, he didn't play great against Auburn, all that. Like, there's going to be games, but most games, you put out some sort of formidable 5, like, or 4 other players with him, they're going to look pretty good offensively. And so that's where I'm at with this first getting more minutes. And even Burgess, although I think there's more, he's got a lot. He'll be very, very good at some point. There's definitely, you can see the things he needs to grow in. There's not really that offensive like trade-off right now in terms of totality as a lineup with first at the 5. And that was the whole kind of theory behind it, is this is just going to be an insanely elite offensive lineup. It's not there. And so now it's worse defensively. And if you're going to get, like, I have the stats right here. This is not accounting for today's game. With TKR at the 5, Purdue's offensive rate is 1.14 points per possession, 1.137. With first and TKR, they're 1.13 points per possession. So 0.01 different offensively. Not that much difference. Defensively, though, with TKR at the 5, Purdue is 1.18 points per possession, off with first at the 5 and TKR at the 4, 1.03. So 0.15 points per possession. That's a huge difference. Like, that is, it takes them with, this is all from CBB Analytics. With TKR at the 5, Purdue is in the 12th percentile defensively, like bottom 12th percentile. Defensively with that lineup, with first and TKR, they're in the 67th percentile. And then offensively, they're 73rd and 70th. So, like, I know that was a very long ramble and convoluted way to say, like, hey, the offense doesn't drop off with first in there. Like, it doesn't. And the defense is much, much better. So it's like, why not just go to it more? That was a long ramble. That was my bad.
No, I'm 100% with you. And I said different things before we came on air and then tempered them when we came on air. The interesting thing to me about the small ball thing is it's like there was a lot of conversation about that small ball lineup will be the most athletic lineup Purdue has had in years, right? And I think they're 100% in terms of just pure athleticism, running, jumping, getting up and down the floor, those sort of things. But you have to be able to create turnovers with that type of team, right, to really make it work. And you have to have a lot of guys that can create off the dribble if you're really going to make that work, in my mind. And then when you see Purdue go up against some SEC teams who play that small ball lineup, they're not more athletic than those SEC teams, right? So they may be way more athletic in that small ball lineup than anything Purdue's had in a while, but relative to some of the teams they're going to play that play the same style, they're not, right? So I don't think the advantage necessarily is imminently there all the time. And I'm with you. I think it's a great lineup to have. And even if they start with it, it's a great lineup to have and see if it's going to work, because it will work against a decent amount of teams. But if not, like, roll out with that big 5 and put TKR at the 4, where his matchup is way, way better anyway, in my mind. Last thing really, Joe, that I had from this game, and it's a maybe a chalkboard thing or a whiteboard thing. I don't know. I felt like we saw the most inverted screens with TKR and Braden today.
Yeah, I mean, I can go to it. Do you have more you want to talk about with it first?
I just thought it worked really, really well today. And we'd seen it some, but I thought, like, for a stretch there, they just kind of hammered it.
Yeah, and that's, it puts defenses in unusual spots. So I can go to it here. So what he means by that is, so this is, gotta adjust my mic. There we go. This is where TKR is going to have the ball, right? And honestly, usually he gets it more like in this area. And then you see Braden Smith, he kind of curls around, and Braden's going to set this screen. So an inverted screen, because the big is going to be the one with the ball here, and you have a guard setting the screen. With this, usually have, Lawyer, Heidi, Colvin, Burgess was there. First maybe is in this area more instead. But what this does is, like, this defender right here, whoever's guarding Braden, I can almost guarantee you they never ever are in drills or practice situations where they have to guard the screener, right? And if they do, it's generally just going to be a switch, right? That's the one thing where defenses will do it, but that 1-5 or that 1-4, even, like, what I mean by that, point guard to, like, a big connection, you don't always want to switch that. And so what it does is, there's a lot of times today, TKR comes off. It's not like TKR is super quick or anything like that. But this defender right here doesn't really know what to do more often than not. It's, do I have to stay with Braden Smith? Because Braden's just going to flip out here, right? And so now you have a big defender. I think they ran it even with him at the 4 and at the 5. I'll erase this for a little bit more clarity. So, well, the screen just happened. We'll say Braden's here. Braden's like coming out to here, right? And he's coming here. You generally have a big trailing. Now TCR can get downhill, and this guard is kind of put in a spot. And then you also have here, right? This is going to be lawyer oftentimes, shooters, makes it hard to kind of help off. And so now you kind of just have this entire area cleared, and TKR already with an advantage getting downhill. And so it's very simple action, right? Just an inverted pick and roll is what that's called. But it's something you've seen Purdue go to a little bit more, and especially in this game, of a way to just kind of manufacture an easy bucket. I don't think it is something you want to go to all the time, because if you run it multiple times in a row, teams are going to get kind of, they're going to understand more of how they want to guard it. I'm going to maybe excluding, like, if it really came down to crunch time and it's working, maybe you just kind of spam it over and over. But as just a kind of change of pace, almost catch teams by surprise, right? Nobody's expecting to have to guard that too much. To just get Purdue a different look, get TKR, especially TKR when in a game where maybe they're doubling the post and things like that, and he can't quite get going in the post. I think it's a good way for him to get looks like that. So yeah, good call out by you for bringing that up.
I really don't have a whole lot else in this game. I know you wanted to talk if we want to look forward a little bit to what's coming down the pipeline, unless you have any other big major takeaways from today.
I want to talk. Well, let's get real quick, because Jeff Parks did do the super chat, $5, said hit the like and subscribe if you haven't. Jeff is one of the day one supporters. We do appreciate that. Jason Depew have hit the like button and subscribed also with the super chat, also a long time supporter. So we do appreciate that and all the support that everybody gives to us. I think there we go. The one thing briefly we've kind of hit on him, like the freshman CJ, we know is a bucket. I am higher than most on Jakari in terms of I think he's a special defender, even if he has freshman lapses right now. I think he's a special defender. And I think in this game, you saw the flash with Burgess of like, oh, like it's there. It's just going to take a little bit of time. Like, honestly, there's this, shout out to you for I think being on this earlier than most of like, I see the scenario more now of like, he's a contributor, real contributor by the end of the year, especially if we'll see what happens. I mean, Bergs, I know day to day or whatever, we expect him to be back. With Jacobson being out, like there is some fouling issues and some mobility issues with Burgess that I think makes it so that first is just going to be the better option, especially because you just want defense more out of that 5 spot. But like there was just that first half, especially, it was just kind of like, okay, I do see it a lot more with Burgess, and that's a little flash. Now, he's a freshman. He's going to be good. He had the yips around the rim. I don't think the defense in the second half was particularly good, but it was just like, okay, there's the flash. You saw, I think same with Jakari. Like the screen navigation is probably the best on the team to me. CJ's a bucket. Like it's just straight up a bucket. Like it is good to see these flashes and some sustained flashes with a guy like CJ for this team that is kind of banking on one of them probably at least stepping up consistently by the end, and also just kind of retaining them for the future. So that was the only other thing I kind of wanted to hit on, was just like kind of shout out to the freshmen for, I think, largely playing well, even if the stat lines aren't, crazy eye catching. Right.
And, I kind of keep my sheet where I'm writing things down about each player throughout the game. And I had a decent amount of things written down about everybody, but my Burgess paragraph was like 2.5 times bigger than everybody else's, both positive and negative. It was like, oh, really nice positive play by Burgess. Oh, negative play by Burgess. But he had a really good big to big, right? High to low pass to TKR. He had a great pass to Miles that then Miles lost out of bounds, cutting underneath the rim. There's a couple other things he did in there that I thought were some real positive things. And you're just right. It's slow. It's not like CJ, where CJ came into the Alabama game, scores like whatever, 9 or 12 points in a row. And you're like, oh, okay. Like I see it, but it's slow with Burgess. He's just, each game, he just looks a little bit better. And I still think by I think he can contribute in short minutes right now, but I think by the time we hit February, maybe March, maybe he's come along enough that he's doing some really nice things. So, looking ahead a little bit, if you're ready.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, and we will get ahead.
Okay.
If we're going under this thing of like, hey, maybe even if First doesn't start, right? First should maybe play closer to starter minutes. You do need another guy to be the backup big, even if First is technically the one coming off the bench, right? Of like, he's the guy that can spell First or TKR in any given situation. I don't know if Berg can do that consistently. I don't know if Burgess can do it consistently either, to be fair, but they are at some point probably going to need one of those two to step up, and Burgess has the flashes. So we can jump a little bit ahead. There's also a bunch of comments that we have started, so I don't think we need to spend too long on this, and then we can kind of get back to the start.
Yeah. I also just start a whole bunch of comments, and when we get to them, I'll kind of go through and pick which ones I show for you to respond to and me to feed off of. But yeah, as we look ahead, and I think it is important to reflect really quickly and look behind in terms of what Purdue has played so far, right? So did hear today, I kind of had one headphone in listening to Bruce Weber. I love it when these Purdue guys come back and call a game, but they did mention that up to this point in the season, obviously it depends on what metric you look at, but Purdue has played the sixth toughest schedule of anybody in the country up to this point. When you look at them relative to the Big Ten, I put something out today on Twitter for those of you guys that follow me there in terms of quad one wins and whatnot. Joe doesn't necessarily love the net, but it does give just a good general overview of like, all right, like who are you playing and who aren't you playing and what's your record against those guys. Oregon and Ohio State are really the only other two teams, right? Purdue's played 7 quad one games. Oregon 5, Wisconsin 5, Ohio State 6, Illinois 5. And then it starts to drop off quite a bit from there. Okay. If you ratchet that up to quad 1A and what that means for those of you that don't know, in the net, if they're ranked in the top 15 for a home game, the top 25 for a neutral site game, and the top 40 for a road game, Purdue has already played 6 of those games, quad 1A games. That's like a sliver of the quad one, basically half, right? Nobody else, I don't think, in the Big Ten relative to that. Quad 1A, yeah. Purdue's played 6. Ohio State has played 5. And then the most anybody else in the Big Ten has played to this point is 3. So Purdue has gone through a really difficult schedule. They managed to come through at 8-4. I think Joe and I, had we been predicting based on what we did kind of previewing the season and what we said might happen in that 4-game stretch, maybe saw them at 9-3 potentially at that point instead of 8-4. But like they're one loss behind what was in our head as kind of the schedule of having a relatively good showing. So I think for the sky is falling folks, obviously the way the losses happened against Auburn and maybe against Texas A&M, where the leads got pretty big there for a minute, can contribute to that thought a little bit more. But I still think Purdue is in good position moving forward. And Joe, if you pull that schedule up again, there are real opportunities for them to do some major things in the next 11 games after this.
Yeah, and that's where I think you look ahead is like this. I mean, it's college basketball. Every game is important. That's why, like, because I'm somebody that likes the NBA. I enjoy watching the NBA. I understand the thing of like the players care more just because a college basketball game, one game is like what? 4% of your season, 3% of your season, right? 1 out of 30-ish. That's a big percent. So 3 to 4 games is 10% of your schedule. And so every game matters in that fact. And that's where it's just like every game is important, but this next stretch is special to me. At Minnesota, home against Northwestern, at Rutgers, home against Nebraska, at Washington. Like that to me is honestly a pretty defining stretch of, is this team going to be just a tournament team that, maybe they can get the double bye, or is this a team that competes for the Big Ten? Competing for the Big Ten at minimum probably has to be 4 not has to be because the Big Ten's so wide open, but like going 4-1 out of that stretch, because I think every game is a very, very winnable game. 3 of them coming on the road. going 4-1 or even 5-0, like I think 5-0 is in the possibilities. That's where it's like, okay, this team can still very much compete for the Big Ten title and win it. Now, if you win both your home games and you drop 2 away games, it's starting to get a little bit fuzzier. But that's where I think, that stretch specifically is so important. Then you got some tougher games kind of after that. But in terms of seeding in that, like, also I want to go back. I don't hate the net. I just hate the quads. There's a lot of opportunities for Purdue to already expand on an already super tough schedule, right? I think KenPom has the Big Ten as the second best conference, in the country, behind the SEC, which is a gauntlet. Purdue right now, I'm looking, and this is from KenPom, there's only 3 power conference teams that have had a tougher non-conference schedule than Purdue. North Carolina, Auburn, which is wild, and then Alabama. Well, I guess Gonzaga, if you count Gonzaga. Purdue has put themselves in the spot. Well, more of like Gonzaga's not in the power conference.
Right. Yeah. No, I got you. I got
you. Purdue has still put themselves in the spot to, like, even if things go poorly, be like at minimum an 8 seed. If things go like, where they're 12-8 in the Big Ten type, like somewhere in that and very much can be a higher seed. So still a lot of good, I think, to come for Purdue, but I do like these next 5 games are important in terms of whether I think they compete for the Big Ten title or not.
Oh, I 100% agree. And I meant to tell you this sooner, Joe, but we had some comments. It might have been the show that I wasn't on. I don't remember for sure, but had some comments. And also when I was going back and watching some YouTube videos that said, can you please leave the stats and other graphics on the screen longer? We see your guys' face enough. We can still hear your voice.
Fair enough.
As we look through this, I'm 100% with you. And like that Minnesota game away, those away games are always going to be tougher. You have to win the ones that you should win, right? So Minnesota away, have to win in my mind. Rutgers away, really, really need to win, with the caveat that like Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper can randomly just be a top 20 team at any given point in time, because they can both go off for 30 to 40 points in a night. But minus Herculean efforts from those two, that Rutgers game should be a game that they win. The Northwestern game at home, I don't care if it's at home. That Northwestern game is going to be tough. They play really tenacious defense. I think they present some matchup problems, but we get them at home. I think that's really, really big. We know Nebraska can do things defensively to what Purdue likes to run offensively, but we get them at home. I think that's really, really important. And then Washington away is another must win outside of Minnesota. I think there's a really good chance they come through that stretch 5-0. 4-1 would be okay, but I think they can come through that 5-0. Obviously, after that, they got to go to Oregon away, right? That's going to be on the end of that stretch. So they're going to have been gone probably 4 days, maybe 5 days at that point, and going up against what right now looks like the best team in the Big Ten. When I mentioned those quad stats, right? Oregon had played 5 quad 1 games. They were 4-1 in those quad 5 games, I believe. They've looked really, really good this year, and maybe a little bit of a surprise, even better than where people might have had them. That's going to be a hard one to win. Ohio State, then they get to come home. They get Ohio State. Ohio State looked good early, lost their big man. They never really disclosed why, to my knowledge, they lost him. And then he comes back to the team and they immediately beat Kentucky and they look good again. So that Ohio State game will be interesting. But again, at home, Michigan, Indiana at home. Following that, 2 home games. Michigan has looked good at times. But to me, those are 2 games that Purdue needs to win as well, being inside of Mackey.
Yeah, and maybe kind of as I look at the schedule further, like maybe we should almost just do like a regroup after the month of January, because it's really the month of January. Like you, in theory, could or should, I don't know if should is the right word, but could or should go 5-0 to start. Obviously, I'm not saying like Oregon's an automatic L, but that's one of the ones where it's like, okay, that makes more sense. And then you got 3 at home to close it out against, 2 teams that, Michigan will be very, very good. Ohio State, I still have no clue if they're good or not. They can be good any night. They can be bad any night. And then IU's been what they've been this year. Like, So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
think
That's
it's
9
10.
games. 9 games in the month
9?
of January.
Oh, you're right.
Like 7-2. Like. Well, okay. I'll frame it this way. Given the schedule, and say we come back at the end of January, and obviously there are a lot more factors of how they look, all that stuff. What would be the record where you're like really all in on this team, and what would be the record where you're like, oh man, there is concerns with this team, if that makes sense?
Sorry, tell me that question one more time.
So there's 9 games in January. What would, like, if you saw Purdue's record at the end of January, what would be a record that would make you go like, oh man, there's real worries here? And what would be a record for you that would be like, oh wow, this team like might be the favorite to win the Big Ten type?
All right, so I think caveat here, right? I think you and I both came into the year thinking Purdue had a chance to be a second weekend team, and neither one of us really looked at Purdue as a Final Four team. So I'm
Correct.
sure there's people listening that really believe this might be a Final Four team again. So if you came into the year thinking that, still believe it, then I don't know. And not to say that's out of the realm of possibility. Crazier things have happened. George Mason went to the Final Four, for God's sakes. But in terms of really feeling like that's a confident chance, is me looking at Purdue as a second weekend team coming into it. If they go through that 7-2 or 8-1, I'm feeling really, really good about Purdue. If they go through it at least 6-3, I'm still okay. Anything less than 6-3 against those teams, I'm starting to get a little worried, because then it gets a lot harder.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. 5-4 or less is like, I mean, depending on how bad, but realistically, at worst, they should probably be like 4-5 if like everything goes bad. That's like, okay, they're a team that's going to be an 8, 9, 10 seed. It just kind of is what it is this year. 6-3 is like neutral but leaning bad. 7-2 is like leaning good, and then 8-1, 9-0 is obviously like really, really good. All that to say, like, Purdue has played a very tough schedule. Purdue has shown right now for sure they are not at that Final Four level of the caliber team. But this season is far from over. Like, this is a team that still can compete in a wide open Big Ten conference. A conference that right now there's like 7 to 8 teams that if they won, I wouldn't be shocked in the Big Ten right now. Like, it is so wide open, and that's where like there's still a lot of basketball to play. This is still a team that like I think another thing with Purdue is how many times are we like, man, they are so good in November, December, and then they fall off. There's a scenario where this is the opposite, where they struggle some in December, and that was the worst basketball they played by far this year. And we get to mid-February and we're like, oh yeah, this is a top 15 team or something like that, top 20 team. I don't know if that will for sure or not, but that is definitely within the realm of possibilities.
Agree 100%. Is there more you want to? Ooh, we're going full dark in the house.
Oh, wow.
This whole schedule is different. I'm telling you, it's the Christmas break team controlling the audio tonight and the lights tonight. It's Boilers in the Stand after dark, not copying off the field of 68 at all. Do we want to get
to the start comments?
Let's get to the starred comments before they actually lock me in here too. If so, yeah, I don't know. Dylan Sinn's still sitting over there, so if they lock me in, maybe him will go down on the court and find a basketball and play one-on-one a little bit. But
there you go.
First comment from Jason Depew. Poor Miles has had it rough offensively lately, but I don't think his defense has suffered from it. Hope he stays positive. Just maybe thoughts on what Miles has shown defensively the last few games, even though his offense has struggled.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's still been pretty good. And I don't think I'm at the point where I want to call Miles an elite defender, but I think he's a solid to good defender. Does a pretty good job keeping the ball in front. He gets the toughest matchup most nights, and that has to be factored in. And it is good to see that, like, right, I think last year with the shooting slump, you would really be like, why is Miles on the floor? This year, it's like, oh man, Miles just has to get out of the shooting slump because Purdue needs him, and Purdue needs what he brings defensively.
Yeah. I'm not actually going to bring this next comment up, but the second half of the comment I wanted you to address. It just said, basically it says, Colvin needs to do more than just shoot threes. He needs to move more, actually create offense, and drive to the hoop on his own.
Okay. I mean, I think we hit on it some, right? Of Colvin is at his best as a catch and shoot guy, or a catch and maybe 1 or 2 dribbles. I guess it just depends on what your opinion of Miles Colvin is. I think for me, even coming from high school, I had a lot of concerns of like, can he really dribble to create his own shots? I think in high school, it was a lot of one dribble, rise up over defenders, which is an elite skill to have. And maybe you'd like to see that even a little bit more, just a one dribble pull up. I just don't feel comfortable with him being tasked as a guy of getting downhill and getting to the rim. And it's right. It's this weird battle balance thing. And even in my head of like, okay, like why would I want Miles Colvin driving contested when Braden Smith and TKR are on the floor? Like I would rather just have the ball in their hands. But I do understand the flip side of that is like, well, what happens if Braden and TKR can't score? Like you do kind of want Miles to try to be able to do that more. And so I don't think it's a big part of his game right now. And so I think there's a lot of better options, but you hope long-term that he can get to it. And maybe that does involve him just trying more right now, even if it doesn't look pretty or work well. I don't know.
Yeah. So there's a couple that kind of piggyback off of this same theme a little bit. So SLK Boiler, who we met at some of our gatherings last year, asked the question how Fletch can get downhill better than Miles, given Miles' athleticism or even Cam. I'll start, and then I'll let you run with this. But to me, there's a really big difference between athleticism and athleticism with the ball in your hands, right? There's a level of coordination that goes into that, a level of shiftiness when you have the ball in your hand as well, to be able to control the ball as your body moves, contorts in different directions, as you attack, as you see multiple defenders. And for me, right, like Fletcher just has that greater hand-eye coordination, even though he's less athletic, and sometimes it can look clumsy and you wonder how in the world he managed to get the shot up on the glass. And he's also really, really good at using the glass, which is a lost skill. So it makes it easier for him when he's kind of fallen or he gets hit and he's fading away back, to just kind of throw it up and hit the right spot on the backboard and still have it drop. But I think it's just that extra coordination, right? It's not that he's super fast. It's not that he's super shifty. He just can create enough space and use that coordination to be able to get a sliver of a look.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit on a lot of it, is that Colvin is very athletic in terms of just like, dude can jump out the gym. Like nobody can take that away from him. Lawyer is a little bit more functional in his movements, and also like kind of going back to high school. I know Colvin was tasked with a lot of shooting and creating. Lawyer was point guard for his team, and he was a very good point guard. He was like, I never expected him to be the starting point guard, but when I watched his high school film, I was like, oh, I could see him getting back up point guard minutes maybe at some point in his career. Obviously that's never happened. But Fletch just, kind of has this ability to, he can, especially with how Lawyer and Colvin are used, right? Where they're more off-ball guys. Lawyer is a little bit better at taking a little bit of an advantage and turning it into something, where I think Colvin, it takes a little bit, even just a little bit longer to process. It process the game and be like, okay, this is what I need to get to. It's a little bit more fluid. It's a little bit more automatic for Lawyer. And that little split in time is all that Lawyer really needs to get downhill, draw contact, things like that. Now, their matchups, it's not going to work, right? Because the athleticism is just going to be able to counter any of that. But it's small thing of like processing and just being able to be functional with the ball that I think gives Lawyer that ability to get downhill a little bit more.
All righty. Let's see. Jason again says, I think they could run some more curls. I'm not sure what cloth means, but curls for Cam and Miles, even a few pick and dives with Braden. And
that's my guess. Both Cam and Miles.
For both. Yeah, the cloth was throwing me off.
Yeah.
Anything you see there in terms of schematically that they could do to get Cam and Miles more involved?
It goes
with
back
the skill
to
set the skill set that they have.
Like in theory, yes, it would be great to be able to get Colvin and Heidi downhill and get them kind of running to the rim already, I think it is easier said than done, right? Especially with, how many times is TKR going to be kind of posting up or in those spots where a defender's there? What is kind of the defense doing? Are they helping in? Are they putting a lot of pressure on Braden to make that pass even tougher? I don't know. Like I truly go back and forth in my head of like, it would be great to try to get them those looks, but at the same time, like, why would you do that when Braden Smith exists? Like, why would you take that rep from Braden Smith in a game when Braden Smith can do what he just did today? I also think it's, like I said, I think it's easier said than done, where Colvin and Heidi still, like, especially if they're curling like that, they have to be able to catch, and more often than not, they're still going to probably have to put the ball on the floor once or twice and go up against a big that's in position to be able to contest. Now, they could do it, but I think it's a little bit easier said than done.
Okay. Jeff Parks says they kept saying on the broadcast that Purdue had no available 7-footers. Was Berg announced to be unavailable for tonight's game? Yes, they did. They did not announce why before the game. I'm not sure if that was addressed in the post-game press conference. I'm sure somebody probably asked about it.
I think he sprained his ankle or foot or something in practice, from my understanding.
All righty. There it is. Joe knows. Salty B, there's a couple that kind of go together here. Salty B says, why not give Cox more minutes? And then Who's Johnny says Cox, like Smith, can take people off the dribble. They're really the only two that can create their own shot. I'll address that first, and then Joe, you can go. I would say they are giving Cox more minutes. There was a long time that the first time CJ would see the floor was the first time that Painter wanted to give Smith his first rest of the game. And then maybe CJ would get some more run. And slowly over time, you're starting to see him get fed in there a little bit more beside Fletcher and Braden, or at least beside Braden. And this game and a couple of minutes and a few other games, even next to Jakari, with Braden out there as well, or Fletch and CJ running the point. So, I mean, I think we've seen it build, especially over the last 4 or 5 games. And if he keeps producing, I think you'll continue to see it build. And as far as Who's Johnny, I would say I think Fletch can create some. If it's the last 6 seconds in the shot clock, though, I'm 100% with you. Those are really the two guys that I want the ball in their hand to create on their own.
Yeah, I mean, CJ has played less than 10 minutes, only 3 games this year. He's played less than 15 minutes for 5 times this year. So, like, he is still getting run. He's played 15, 19, 17, 11, 19 in the last 5. He is definitely getting run. He's going to get more run. It's where do the minutes come from? Like, Colvin plays 19 today by my counts, and CJ played 16 by my counts. Like, are you Cam played 18? Jakari played 12. So, like, are you taking all Jakari's minutes for that? Are you taking more of Colvin's minutes? Are you taking more of Fletch's minutes? I think you do want to try to get him more minutes. It just becomes harder if you're trying to still keep Harris involved, keep Colvin involved, keep Heidi involved. And that'll be the other thing I meant to bring it up when we were talking about first at the 5 is, like, I'm curious, like, we don't need to go long in depth on this. You can keep it short. Does Heidi play the 3 ever? If Purdue plays first at the 5 more, do you see that happening at all, just to try to get him more minutes, or is it already too congested that it just makes it tough?
I mean, I think if he starts falling back to a 2 big lineup consistently, then I do think you see him at the 3 some, as long as the other 2 spots are Braden and CJ, Braden and Jakari and CJ, potentially, where he doesn't have to be tasked with a ton of ball handling, more like we saw last year with Lance and with Braden out there with him. So, I mean, I think we still could for sure. Matchup dependent and just dependent on who's rolling. So, last one, and then we can sign off here. Thanks to everybody again. I think between all sites here, around 1,000 people who've tuned into the show. Appreciate you all. Hit the like button, subscribe, follow us. Again, you guys can always send a super chat if you want to make sure your comment is read, or just feel like you want to support us. We do appreciate that. It helps us get to these games and provide you kind of all those little extras and coverage that go along with it. Salty B says, Joe, Kraig, where do you see Purdue in the Big Ten as of right now? I think that's supposed to be 4th or 5th best team. I don't know what you're thinking, Joe, and I don't want you to influence me, and I know I won't influence you because you know you're way smarter than me. So I still have them as a top 5 team in the Big Ten. I think their schedule was absolutely brutal coming into this point. I don't think there's more than a couple of teams, UCLA, maybe Northwestern, that I think can do the same defensive things that gave Purdue a ton of trouble in the games that they really struggled in coming up to this point. So for me, and at the end of the day, they've still got a guy named Braden Smith, who some people like are really shading right now, saying he's not even an all big player, and like back off, man, just back off. There's a lot of season to go, and a couple of subpar games don't change that. So I still have them as a top 5 team in the league. I still think they'll compete to win the Big Ten. I don't know that they will, but I think they'll be in the mix.
So, and my rankings that I do is a little different than just the pure power ranking. I think I factor in the future a little bit more than just what has been shown. But my latest one, I had them 6th. But the caveat with that is that it would not take much for me to put them 3rd. I think for me, as of right now, I'm comfortable UCLA and Oregon being 1 and 2. But after that, the other 3 teams I have ahead of them, Illinois, Maryland, and Michigan. Those are the other 3 I have ahead of them right now. Purdue already beat Michigan at home. I think if I were to put a line on these games, basically any combination of the 4 on a neutral floor would be a pick 'em. I think they're all pretty even. So 6th is where I technically have them, but they're not even far off from number 1. I don't think UCLA and Oregon are a step ahead per se. I'm just a little bit more confident in them. So it's a wide open Big Ten.
I'm still buying into a little bit of the fact that Oregon and UCLA, and I'm not even necessarily talking about this strictly from a player standpoint, but Oregon and UCLA are now getting into that stretch of schedule where they've got to do the massive travel. And they've got to figure out how they're going to handle that with their players, the coaches, and the people in the athletic department have to figure out how they're going to do travel. When do they leave? When do they come home? How much practice time do they give them? How much time do they give them to adjust once they get to those locations? When they fly all the way out to Rutgers and Penn State or whatever, and they traverse back and forth across the country like they're going to on these long distance flights. So I still think wherever in my head I think Oregon and UCLA are, I think there's a game or 2 they're going to lose in there just as they deal with that travel schedule, and everybody behind the scenes and the coaching staff and sports administration, everything else, figure out for the first time ever really how to deal with this.
And my thing with that is it'll be fun. It'll be interesting to monitor, but I think there's 2 other things with that. One, they only have to do that 3 times. There are only 3 road trips like that for all these West Coast teams this season, right? So it's 6 total games. They only have to do it 3 times. It's not like they're immune to having to travel, right? UCLA, I know, played, I think, in North Carolina or New York against North Carolina, something like that. So there's that aspect of hey, they don't actually have to do it that much, although it is significant. But that there is the flip side of they're also going to play, 8 teams or something like that, that have to do the far West Coast travel. And so it's does that balance out of, yeah, maybe they lose one where they probably shouldn't have because of the road trip, but they could probably easily gain one that maybe they should have lost just because it's, the opposite where, I don't know, I'm looking at UCLA's schedule. Wisconsin plays at UCLA, something like that too. So it'll be interesting to monitor. I'm not saying one thought is right or wrong, but I think I have less concern about it than probably consensus. But I understand the worry.
Yeah.
Shout out the Big Ten.
I'm all wrapped
up. They did a
up.
very good job with this Pac-12 or the Pac-4 scheduling. They did a very good job, I think, balancing it. So, all right, I'm good.
I'll let you sign us off, Joe.
Okay. Well, appreciate everybody tuning in, a little bit of the rambling towards the end, but that's what we do here at Boilers in the Stands. Make sure to subscribe, turn on bell notifications. We will be back with a preview tomorrow or Tuesday morning, one of the two. This will be the last post-game show of 2024, though. So hope everybody's been having good, happy holidays, safe travels, hopefully just general health in general as well. I should be pretty good to go after hopefully tomorrow, but yeah, and then hope everybody has a happy new year, as this will be the last live post-game show of 2024. Appreciate everybody tuning in, and for the post-game show, we will catch you all in 2025.